Hi, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast, where I'll help you turn your team from the biggest expense to the company's biggest advantage. As always, I'm your host of Ben-Yosef, Tech Executive Coach and Advisor, and our subject today is pain is a signal. I know that in general, we as human beings tend to really try to avoid pain, right? I think that's normal. And yet, sometimes pain is a signal that we ought to give attention to and be very, very mindful of. And sometimes I tell my clients that some friction is healthy, as in, sometimes I want to make sure that things aren't automatically. The second the CEO even voices a concern, it gets added to the backlog of the current sprint. Sometimes I do want some friction, and that's because that added friction is an opportunity to think and decide and plan what we're going to be doing. That's fine. Nevertheless, sometimes pain is something that we need to be very mindful of, something that gives us a signal that's incredibly important. For example, sometimes when I talk to people about things that are going on, and I notice that they have pain when it comes, for example, to how they manage their deployments. And I see that the company, let's say, for example, that you twisted your ankle. What are you going to be doing? You're going to be limping. You're going to be avoiding putting weight on that foot for a bit, right? And that's pain and the signal that you're getting. And sometimes I see the same happening in companies when it comes to how they manage things without them realizing that they're avoiding some sort of pain. So because their deployments are so messy, all of a sudden they release only once every X weeks, becomes such a big deal and can only be then. I'm like, okay, I understand why you're doing it when, given the pain that you have, this is, your ibuprofen. But how about we treat the symptoms, right? Can we make the deployments not that big of a deal in your company? Similarly, when they have, so as an example, something that I've seen across 3 different startups recently, when they have an on-premise solution, and managing that on-premise solution becomes something that is painful for myriad reasons, because their DevOps is not that good, because they haven't found an easy way to control this or control that. Maybe the contracts are a mess, and therefore it becomes very, very problematic for the team to know what they're enabling and managing and deploying and getting logs in all different on-prem clients. When that's the situation, I find that all of a sudden every version release for on-prem again becomes that big of a deal. And it's like, what are we putting there? What are we not? How are we managing the cherry picking, what we're putting there and not, etc. And it becomes a really, really messy situation. The same happens sometimes when it comes to all hands, when I see teams or even one-on-ones, when I see leaders trying to avoid certain scenarios, because whenever it happens, there's pain. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to give people guidance, how to do coaching, how to plan for the message you're going to be delivering. And as a result of that, what ends up happening is that these people, because of the pain, are trying to have as least possible of that. When they are in the executive meetings, they feel so lost, or they feel like a fish out of water. They don't know what to do. They don't understand some of what's being talked about. So they start avoiding that. Again, all of those are pain. And when you react to the pain, you're doing something wrong. Now, again, some friction is healthy, but we have to be mindful of the difference between friction and actual pain. If you work out, whenever I say work out, if you notice me, gesturing like that, it's because in my home office here, I usually work out over there. I've got the pull-up station and everything. And when you work out, you probably have heard that you want to not push through any sort of pain. You want to be very mindful of pain. Yes, you do need to exert an effort. Things are troublesome. Things are not troublesome. Things are hard. So this is my English as a second language. Things are hard, but you don't want to feel pain and try to push through that, because that's a problem. That's how we get injured. And when we start avoiding things because of pain, it's time to get some, physiotherapy or something, or get a good massage. And in our context, it means that when you notice that your team is trying to do these bypasses, tries to avoid things, sometimes that's the way it is. But a lot of the times, most of the times, I dare say, is a signal that we're avoiding handling a meaty problem that sometimes it might require a genuine effort to solve. Other times, you'd be surprised to see that all the effort that goes into avoiding the problem could have easily been diverted into just handling the problem once and being done with it. Because deployments might seem like that's such a big a deal in your company, but a lot of times it's a solved problem. If you look outside, if you have a DevOps person that's been through a couple of companies, they've seen how it ought to be done. You can ask your peers and very easily hear very good things. You don't have to keep fighting a fight that's been won several years ago. You can do something that will dramatically improve how that looks, take you from whatever you are to the 80% level of the solution. Yes, there would always be that remaining 20%. Sometimes it's worth tackling them, often not, but even those 80% would be amazing, would make a big difference. So for you, what I want you to consider as you're moving forward here is think about, where do you see the pain happening and where are you avoiding it and the root cause of the pain? Be it by avoiding things as an organization, like releases, like giving each other feedback, etc. Be it for you personally when it comes to speaking in general with people, giving them one-on-one feedback, or that specific person that you're avoiding, those specific types of meeting with the board, interviewing for certain positions, whatever it is. Sometimes it's just friction and it's good, but many times you might be noticing some pain, and again, you're just trying to live your life limping when you can just solve it once. And we're gonna get enough reasons to be limping in life. Might as well at least avoid it for those things that are not the rules of nature that we can avoid, that we can fix. And when that pain arrives, you need to be mindful of it. You need to take a second and think what it means. Why are you reacting like you're reacting? What are you trying to avoid? What's the worst case scenario here? What probably others are doing? What would the best version of yourself would be doing? These are the sorts of questions that I ask my clients when we want to handle it. And often you can solve it very, very quickly. And if you need some extra help, my email's in the show notes and I'll be happy to chat. That's it for this week. As always, thank you for joining me. If you haven't yet, do check out my newsletter where every week you're going to get this podcast, an article, a video, and some extra free goodies. The link will be in the show notes. If you have any questions or comments, do let me know. Again, my email's in the show notes. And I'll see you here next week. Ciao.